Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 54th live stream for the MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. On today's episode, I have Kage in the studio with me today, and we are going to be discussing a viewer-submitted topic, a question that they kind of had and wanted us to chit-chat on stream about, and it's going to be about attunement limitations and why 5th edition set an attunement limitation, and a little bit more about some ideas that we can balance off of that, and try to see if we can make it a little bit better, or at least see what we do, because Kage and I treat it a little bit differently. So we're going to get into that, see where that takes us. We're probably going to have a lot of spin-off conversations from this. It's going to be a pretty fun one. Do have a backup idea if we need it, but we shouldn't. So yeah, let me get right into it. Let me get Kage in here, and we will kind of get things started. How's it going, man? How's your Friday?
Oh, we are chilling. What is happening? I am very excited to be here. A very interesting topic, and I'm kind of excited to tackle it because, yeah, one of the things I mentioned to you before stream is, like, honestly, in my realm, in my world, like, as a DM, I've never thought about attunement. Like, it's just so crazy to me. Like, I know about it, obviously, because I'm a player and I have items that I'm attuned to as players and stuff like that. And, like, I know it's there in D&D discussions all the time. We have attunement required stuff. Like, I know it's there, but it just, I don't know. I just never actually came up.
And that's why it's a good topic, because basically we had Inventorology in our Discord. We got a suggestion to talk about this, a topic suggestion, and basically their question was, why is it capped at 3? And then they shared a homebrew rule that they use, which I think is actually a fantastic fix for anybody looking for a quick fix for attunement limitations. I think if you believe in them, if you believe in having attunement for a purpose of a limiting factor, whether it's to limit the type, because there's two different types of limitations we should probably talk about first, right? There's the attunement limitation of limiting what or who can attune, and then there's the attunement limitation of a maximum, right? And that's, I think today's topic is more about the maximum limitation of how many you can attune to. But with that, if you have to be in one of two schools, either you don't think that it's necessary, or you do think that it's necessary. Whether you think that it's good to be at 3 is beside the point, right? It's more about whether or not you think attunement to limit the amount that you can have is important or not. And what I think that Inventorology did was a good solution for those that want to keep a limit. They want to say, hey, you can't have that many.
Right.
I think that their homebrew rule is perfect for that. But it is interesting because, yeah, attunement has always been a very weird thing for me in High Point, because I've always had it, but it has been sparingly used. Like everything I always say, everything has a reason. But for me, in High Point, I've used attunement items even more specifically, more sparingly, because for me, the attunement has to represent something more than a limitation, right? Like for me, having an item that is, say, attunement limited to paladins, I'm not just going to have an item that is just because I wanted only paladins to be able to use it because it makes sense. For me, that attunement needs to have some structural understanding, right? Whether it's because the power, like the charge, is being able to, like double your smite, ability, right? A very paladin level item, right? You could say, right, well, it's going to only work with paladin charged, spells, or because it's a divine weapon, right? And even a cleric isn't holy enough or worthy enough to bear the ever living presence of their god. So therefore the paladin is the only one that can hold it, right? And that's why they can only wield that power, and that's why the attunement. Like I can understand justifications for any of those limitations, but that's where I like to use them. But realistically, I've never really made a hard and fast rule with intent on limiting how many you can have. It's never really come up for me in terms of, I've just never given out enough that I would ever even be concerned. And again, I'm not the kind of DM who's just going to abuse the rules. I've never considered making an NPC that has that many. I have NPCs that have several, but I've never really like tried to go to an absurd amount.
I do think that might have a little bit to do with the fact that I feel like you might be more selective about your player base. And as a result, there are some players that might be in another DM's world whose their goal, their mentality a lot of the times is to break the game. Right? And break the game, so to speak, just to do things, to create these combos. You know, if you've ever played Magic the Gathering, there's all kinds of infinite combo loops and weird
absolutely. Everyone's going to find the loophole.
And that's what a lot of people want to do. That's why certain things in D&D are limited to, hey, you can only cast one spell on your turn. Well, hey, let me find some weird game-breaking thing where I can cast an infinite number of spells in my turn. Or let me do the Peasant Cannon where we're technically moving something from one side of the town to the other side of the town in only 6 seconds because they're all lined up, and then you just let go of it and it launches. And I'm like, you're just trying to... And I don't think you've played with many players who are trying to do that.
Oh, I mean, I have. And it's just, for me, it always comes down to... I mean, I have as a player and as a DM. And for me, it's like, you know, when it comes to that, a lot of the times I feel like it's lack of ownership and accountability on the DM's part some of the times, because I mean, the reason why I personally, I guess I'll just get it out of the way. I don't think we need a hard and fast rule in the book for an attunement limitation, like how many you can have. And the reason why I think it's actually bad to have a hard and fast rule like this, because not everything needs a hard and fast rule. Sometimes you need to allow DM discretion, and that needs to be the final call. And the reason why I feel that way is because at the end of the day, if you think about how attunement works and how giving out items of attunement work, the idea of someone, if you think that there needs to be a cap, like let's say you think that 3 is a good cap, think about the situation. Like, think about all of the ways that would have to work out for a player in order to even get this. Because we had this conversation off stream a little bit, but let's take, one thing I think we most of us can agree on is solo gaming, one-on-one gaming, while not rare, is not the most common style of gaming. It's mostly with gaming groups. Now, I'm not saying that most gaming groups don't have solo sessions, back gaming sessions, or, once in a while you can just work with your player of the DM. But
for sure,
I would say that the vast majority of people, or the overwhelming average of people that play D&D, play group-based sessions and play group-based campaigns, meaning you're not playing the game full on from just your character's point of view. It's more about what the party needs, what the story wants to drive.
You are a part of a group and you're playing as such, for sure.
And we've talked a lot about how High Point in even in a party, even when I have a bunch of people together and a bunch of characters together, I still try to hone in and let each player and character know that they are playing their own game. Regardless of the fact that you have a party of 5 people and you are all working towards a goal that you have all collectively chosen, you are still playing your own game. You are not beholden to this in any way. But again, kind of like you said, I'm not so much selective on my players, but this is where I'm fully confident in saying that the onus is on a lot of the DMs, because you've seen me and how I DM. I don't give the same type of opportunities to find those loopholes, right? Like, I don't sit there and micromanage and handhold character building, but I'm definitely much more interested in making sure that I'm at least aware of what's being built, whereas there are DMs who are like, hey, just go build your character and come in. Then, if you're not part of that, if you're just allowing them to build anything without restriction or without guidance or without any idea of what's happening, and then you have 5 people come together, no wonder you have min-maxing issues and people trying to do these weird things, right? But when you set a good foundation and you set the criteria for how things are going to unfold and where people fit in, and you make it more personalized, there's less of I feel like I give less of a reason to min-max, because if the game is only about what you built, just what you wrote down, then yeah, of course you're going to min-max it out. But if you're basically making it of what can you build through gaming, right? Like what we talk about, like playing the character and having the character evolve. That's one of the things that I do to help mitigate that, is giving people less of a chance to find those loopholes, or at least to run the loopholes even if they found them. But I digress. Going back to why I think it's a bad idea to cap it is because even if like let's say you agree that 3 is a cap. What are you doing as a DM to get a single player, whether they're one-on-one gaming or in a group? Think about, if they're one-on-one gaming, how many items are you throwing at them? Like, how often are you gaming, and how many gaming? However, is it every other gaming session? Every other fight? Is it every fight? Is it every 10 gaming sessions? I mean, why is there a cap at 3? At what point? Now they're level 20, and now you're worried at level 20 that they're getting a 4th item. They're not going to get it at 5th edition. You know, they're not going to get it at 5th level.
That can be true.
Like, I just look
what
at
about if, say, there was a player, like, they killed a dragon and they got into the dragon's horde. So they got like a shit ton of money, right? And with this money, they go to somewhere and they get commissioned some items. Mm-hmm. And these items are powerful enough that theoretically they should require attunement or something like that. So they're manufacturing the need themselves for an excess amount of attunement.
And okay, so and that's where we'll get into my solution, because that is a good point. Is if you have somewhere that you have pre-established that could hold and reasonably suggest that you could obtain these items, because I think of it more as you're kind of like trickle feeding these, right? You don't just find a bunch of them. And you usually get them rarity. So my first instinct is, let's say you're in a group of 5 people, right? Having a cap of 3 means that either A, one person is either super lucky on the roll tables and always getting an item that only they can attune to or only really benefits them. Or you're letting them run the game and everybody's just super powering either they're willingly or unwillingly, they're all powering the same player.
Yeah.
Or you're giving the entire party so many items that they've overflowed in excess.
They've
that
all
now
maxed
you have
out
another
their
character needing a 4th. Like, I'm trying to reasonably justify, outside of a fantastic situation where they're rich and they just go somewhere, and at that level you should be at a gaming plus. Like, you should have DMs think about a game plus of your own, like, setting. If you've been gaming long enough with people who want a power level, think about like how you want to do that. But that to me is like a game plus concept of, we did a dragon's horde worth of money and I can buy anything I want. And there's a magical city you told me about that has every magical item in a known existence. Like, okay, that's a justifiable situation. But then it's as easy as, yes, but of course the city has limitations on how many you can get. Or,
that's
like,
fair.
There's so many different ways.
Regulations on the trafficking of all these items and stuff like that.
But in my opinion, if you've gotten to a point to where outside of this like situation, right, you've built a place that could house enough, that could reasonably be obtained by a single person, the idea that you've given them the ability to get beyond 3 is, in my opinion, you either gave it to them way too quickly, or it's been long enough that are you really that worried about one more? It's level 20, and you've trickle fed it every 5 levels, and at level 20 they've got their 4th one, because if you do that right, you give them a super powerful item every 5 levels. Let's just say that's what you're doing.
Yeah.
So on the 4th, you're like, oh, it's 20th level, so now you got to give one up, and then they're really, really struggling. So again, not only do they have to be in the super rare situation, but then the situation has to be that it's overwhelmingly better that they just most people would just say, why not just add it on, right? But it's like, you could have given them 2 different helms, and now they have to choose. You didn't have to give them multiple types, right?
See?
Again, the DM has the discretion to make things. Even if the roll tables, again, all of these things have to come into play in order for this one character to justifiably have more than the magical 3. And this is my problem with why having a hard, fast rule. It shouldn't be done because it makes rule lawyering more difficult, because it just makes it more annoying. And again, it's basically like saying the DMs were so mad that they couldn't tell their players no, that they cried. Not that they cried, but it's like, because 5th edition made this, right? It's like, out of nowhere, we never had this need. And attunement wasn't even a thing in older editions.
Was it really not?
No. There were saving throws for weapons in older ones. It's believed, actually someone wrote up a really good like review of it, but it's kind of a spin-off of what were saving throws for weapons back in the day. For magical weapons, they would have like degradation and saving throws and stuff like that. And there was another thing where
when you say saving throws,
like if you had an item on you and you died, in like the original text, the item could get destroyed if you died, if like the wearer died. That was it wasn't called attunement, but the rules started to form this concept that you and the item were bonded in a way. And 5th edition is what came out with attunement, right? 2014 is when that started. But
So that means there weren't any like restrictions on wielding things,
Unless
or
their DMs did, but there was
okay,
no rule that specifically said this person
like
can't.
you wouldn't likely find a resource
Correct.
that
There wasn't.
said,
Yeah.
"Hey, only these people can use this" or whatever.
Yeah, unless you find the extended resources, or it could be like there were certain things that were only able to be wielded, like like giant weapons or certain weapons from like certain races and things like that.
Right.
But outside of that, yeah, there was no concept of attunement before fifth edition. So it's like my concept of if the DMs want this, it's like so you just can't tell your players no, or you can't properly
Can't tell your
work
players.
this into a situation.
I have no self-control.
Or again, why are you giving them so many that it's that much of a problem? So what they have four, like, are they all in conjunction with itself that powerful that, or did you just not plan it out that they could have these in conjunction? Because everyone always talks about like, well, the players shouldn't have that much power. And it's like, what power are you giving them? The players aren't telling you what items that they're finding. Unless you're going off roll tables and they're just getting extremely lucky,
I
which,
feel like
by the way, if they're getting extremely lucky, that just means that's part of the game.
When they say what power, I honestly feel like a lot of the times it's people's mindsets of a magical item equals a certain volume of power.
Yeah.
So if you have a rare item, you have 2 leets of power.
I
And
think
I'm like, what?
I think it's also because we have, and this is also a social media issue. We have such a large community that lives in the, I don't want to call it the what if, because it's not really that. We have such a large community in D&D, both playing and non-playing D&D part of the community, but they're all about the build, not the play. So I think a lot of this also comes when you have 5th edition really looking at, oh my God, look at all the, because again, they started focusing on look at your character at level 20, not at level 1, right? They basically forced you to plan out your character because all of these archetypes and all of these things that happen, you had to know early on what you needed.
When D&D started blowing up, I remember seeing all these videos of like, hey, here's how you build Darth Vader, here's how you build the Hulk, here's how, and they're all like level 20 builds, you know.
And that's what I think happens is when you have people doing that, when you have a large community living in that world and you have these fantastic builds, like look at this at 15, like if you were able to do this by the book at level 12, you could be a god with these items. And it's like, if the book needs a hard and fast rule to stop something like that, it's the problem is we're being influenced by things that won't be happening. Like, how in a gaming session would that happen? Like, you could sit there and tell me in a 15-page essay exactly how that could happen if your DM ran you through that exact scenario and you succeeded in all of those battles, got that like you could sit there and pull all the books together. I mean, look what I did at the creation of High Point. Look what all of the source material I used for the creation of High Point didn't mess with any actual like contingent or consistencies in the timeline. I just used what they had and filled in what, unnecessary information that doesn't mess with continuity. You can do that with anything. So of course you could justify saying, well, if my character goes here and does this and beats this person and does this, it's like, but is that the gaming campaign? Is that what your DM is running you through? And if you're the DM running that campaign, either you are very lucky to have a player who also is in on it and does that exact plan, or you both are in on it and it's not even a game anymore. It's not a D&D game anymore. It's just a story that you guys are literally have already pre-narrated. Like, yeah. So to me, I know I'm getting kind of heated, but to me, it's one of those situations where I am not happy that we had to have a hard and fast rule, because to me, a hard and fast rule means that somebody doesn't want to do the work. They want to just be like, oh, hey, that's the rule. That's the rule. It says it in the book, whatever. And you don't want to think about it. There are plenty, there are plenty of rules that we take for granted that aren't hard and fast, right? Like, I saw this YouTube video recently, which kind of plays into this. But they did a test. They had a bunch of people sit there and they did this test where they took the standard size for a healing potion. They just filled it up with like colored water, and they had a couple of them, and they timed people and they said, okay, you're gonna pop that open and drink it as fast as you can. You know what the average time was?
Way longer than 6 seconds.
11 seconds is the average time frame for someone to down that. So when you tell someone, and when someone wants to make the argument, oh, potion should be a bonus action, In what fucking world are you?
Dragon Ball Z, Sensu Bean.
Well, and that's but this is where, to me, this is where in High Point I have like
Saw a
you said this,
dude
I have
create a carbonated one, and he's like, "This is the only way. This is actually gonna go down that fast."
well, and for me too, it's like, you can talk about like, well, Germans can drink a whole pint in a couple, like there's ways, but my thing is that's why in High Point I created a much larger scale of potions, right? And they actually range in size. I have a flask, which to me is not a giant container, but it's more like, just like a little pop in like a little shot.
So
And from there it goes into like, it goes in from a vial to a flask to like it actually goes up in size, in my opinion, like it should in size and severity. But yeah, it's like those things. We don't specifically say how long it takes to drink something. It's not a hard and fast rule that needs to be in there. But saying something's an action or a bonus action suits the purpose. So again, I don't like the fact that we have a hard and fast rule. I don't think we need it. I think it's a crutch for DMs to have to fall back on it. And I think if you look, there's more people who disagree with it than agree with it. There are more people who have come up with homebrew alternatives than there are people arguing for it.
Yeah, I would definitely say people, well, from my experience, don't necessarily argue for it at all. There are definitely some who will rules lawyer and say that's what it says just because they're the rules lawyer, but regardless,
Yeah, and some of the people that have like said like why it's in there or like try to justify it, the thing is because there is no justification and there's never been one. Jeremy Crawford has never talked about it. The closest thing he gets is read the rules in the DMG. It says you can max out at 3. Like it's literally,
he just says it as a statement of fact rather than
there's no justification or reasoning for it, and that's why I think it's a fascinating topic, right? I think that it's a really strong point, because you could say that it's OP to have as many as you want, but in what world? In like I said, unless you said yes, there is a floating city that has every magical item you could think of, and that person not only got to be insanely rich, but got to that city, and therefore they're arguing with you saying, well, why can't I just suddenly have all these items? And you could say, well, this city has policies, and they're like, well, I'm going to stay here indefinitely until I can buy them all and wear them all. You know what I mean? Like you can justify pushing the boundaries, but here's my problem: is people who make the argument of, well, people are always just going to try to break the rules, and you know what you do? You go, well, no, the house rule is this, and then you stop there. The idea of them arguing further than that, it's like, if you need a house rule, or it's like if you need the hard rule to shut them up, then you don't, like, you're not having a good communication with them, right? Because like you and I have had conversations. And I have had deep conversations about my rule sets, not because you necessarily, I mean, you have disagreed, but it's not because you disagree. It's because the logic is more important than your opinion.
Yes.
And in the end, I don't get as defensive, because it's more about, you're not trying to tell me I'm wrong. I just need to make sure that you understand my reasoning. Whether or not you agree with it doesn't matter. But you're just like, can I at least have it explained just so I understand how you're justifying it?
And I will say that there are times where even I will admit I have pushed, because there might be something that like I'm trying to wrap my mind around, to make sense of, or whatever, and I'm like, okay, like can it work this way? Can it work, like, and I'm trying to like push and to find like the way it works, you know.
And it's not just because there are people who approach it from the point of view of, how does it work, or I want to do this, and they go, no, it works like this, and then they're like, okay, I'll just do it like that. Whereas for you, it's not so much, I want to know how it works in this situation, and I also want to know how mechanically do you describe it, or do I justify it so you can use it again. Like, it's not just in the moment, why not?
Yes.
It's why not
throughout time.
And how do I use that why not later?
How can I expect it to function when it's being interacted with by myself, by other people? Like, what is this going to look like concretely in the world? Is this a force of nature that I can rely on, like gravity? You know what I mean? Like, a lot of the things that are important to me in games is consistency, is again, like you were talking about earlier, being able to kind of like immerse yourself in the world, you know, and it's hard to do sometimes when stuff doesn't make sense or when things feel inconsistent. It's like you see a glitch in the Matrix. You know something's wrong. You know this isn't the world that it should be. It's all of a sudden like...
Well, and it dampens the experience that you have, because when you have an expectation and you have that buildup, right? It's like, it's one thing to just be misunderstood. Like, oh, I thought that's how the rule was. But when you see something happen and then you try to recreate it ever so slightly, but you have that expectation, you have a buildup, you have a... I mean, players have this, like, you always want to, like, make a move, right? And what I mean by that is you always want something to be cinematic or be game-changing. Like, we love that as players. We want those moments. We want... Like, the DM isn't always in control of a cinematic moment, and those are nice when a storyteller can do that. But how often do you just want to be the one that's just like, last-ditch effort, guys, I grab my sword, and I know I'm not proficient in ranged, but I'm just going to throw my sword at him, just last-ditch, otherwise I'm dead. And you roll a nat 20. And you're like... Dad, it was it's just like, out of all odds, you do the one thing you shouldn't, and it works. And those are the moments we all want, right? Some players, let's face it, y'all try too hard to make everything you do that. But we all want that, right? Whether we try to or we just hope for it. Like, I remember my favorite, still to this day, it was, oh my God, actually my very favorite, like, cinematic moment that was unintentional, like the dice told the story.
Oh, yep.
Was when we ended up, I was in, actually it was a AD&D first edition. So
really?
we had done the transition into first edition. So this was super old rules, one attack per round period, like really hardcore rules. But again, that's like...
Is that the same for the enemies too?
Oh yeah, no, yeah. We were playing a hardcore AD&D original core rule sets. And there was a moment where we were in this like cave trying to like attack these people, and we were like in a doorway and they were like down the hall in another doorway, and we were taking pop shots at each other with like the crossbows, and it just, it was kind of like, just, it was going really slow, and it wasn't really cinematic. It was just boring. We were just like, okay, I go, okay, I shoot, they shoot, okay, they shoot. So my character, I just wanted to be like, okay, we got to like push. Like, we basically got to like get more than one of us in a doorway. So I was like, well, if more than one of us can shoot, maybe this would be better. So I took a sacrifice move. I'm like, well, I don't want to leave the doorway and lose my shooting opportunity just to give someone, like, I don't want to just trade shooting opportunities, right?
Right.
So what my character did was, I was like, fine, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to dive out the door, go prone. I'm just going to dive out the door, hit the ground, crossbow ready, aim and shoot. Down the hall, I'm just going to aim and just try to hit into that doorway where we know they are. And then that way I'll free the doorway up so someone else can peek out and also fire. Nat 20. Hit the deck, got the guy right in the head, and it was the last enemy. We didn't know, but it was the last enemy behind the door. So my character just, like, literally just dives into this hallway, like, action style, and just, ba-dink, and just gets him right in the head. Clean. And it was just like that felt clutch, so bro. Good. And it wasn't like, again, those are the moments as a player that we all want, right? And if you're trying to force them, that's no fun, and that's where the DM kind of has to, like, has to wrangle it in. But I don't know, man. Like,
there's a lot of times where a lot of people try really, really hard to manufacture those things all the time, and I think that's where a lot of the min-maxers, the I want to be the superstar, the I want to take every shining moment possible, and those people in general are hard to play with. Right. Yeah. And it's because it's supposed to be a team game. It's supposed to be, we're all in this together.
Yeah. And that's why I just don't understand, like, how does attunement really get abused? Like, how can you truly abuse attunement if the DM is in control? I just don't understand.
And I think it's I don't know if it's like a deterrent. I don't know if it's like, hey, don't even think about trying to do this. Don't waste you and our time trying to go and be this, I'm going to get 1 million attunement slots. It's just not possible. You can only get 3. It's what the rules say. Just leave it alone. Like, maybe that's people just are trying to keep that away from people's minds. But I honestly look at that as like I've always been given this analogy a long time ago. When you're training a dog and you don't want your dog to chew on your slippers, for instance, what a lot of people do is they just hide the slippers. They just take the slippers away from the dog. But that does nothing to teach the dog not to do it. It just doesn't give them access to it, right?
Exactly.
The second those slippers show up again, guess what? They're going to start chewing on them just like they always would.
Right.
You need to keep the temptation there. You need to allow the thing there and to train them to say no. Train them that you're here for a different reason. You're here and your purpose is to play this game with us, not be the star of the show, be the center of all things. And it's hard, but if you're really in a game, like, unfortunately, there are DMs that are like that. I know that there are a lot of like married couples that are like DM and player, and the one of the wife, they're the only one that ever freaking matters, or the wife only picks on the husband. Honestly, sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes they can treat them completely like trash. But
yeah,
like,
yeah,
you
like,
know,
it's a power dynamic.
It happens sometimes.
That's a little bit different,
but
difficult with the party.
But at the end of the day, like, if that's what you're bringing to the table, if you're bringing like camaraderie to the table, this kind of stuff just really becomes a non-issue.
Exactly, and that's what I think too. I think going back to Inventorology's solution. So if you are a DM who thinks that there should be some sort of limit,
I am excited for this,
but don't like the 3-point limit, I really like this one. So Inventorology's homebrew rule is that everyone gets an attunement limit equal to 1 plus their proficiency bonus, which I think is a great mechanic for a lot of things. Like proficiency bonus, I feel like, I don't want to say it's underutilized, but I think it's underrated as a modifier or for something like this. Like,
yes,
like I don't want to say it's under or overused. I think it's well used. I just think it's underrated. I just don't think that it gets enough appreciation for what 5th edition did with it, right? Because even though I much prefer having a different type of proficiency outset, the kind of simplicity of it, of your specific stat build has led to these proficiency bonuses that aren't relevant to any one thing.
And I think that because they keep the scaling of your proficiency bonus throughout your levels the way that they do, it gives it the ability to be more diverse, right? You can multiply by your proficiency modifier. You can add your proficiency modifier. You can do something your proficiency modifier number of times. Like, there's all different types of ways to implement it. Like, imagine if it was like your level. Like, your level was your proficiency. Then if it was 20, you'd never want to multiply by 20, right? You know, like adding 20 to damage, like, yeah, that's great. But like, then you start doing like, what was it? Like, there are other editions that you get into like crazy high numbers. You're talking about like doing 300 points of damage, or like getting like a 200.
4th edition was really big on
like,
just it's just
monster numbers, and
yeah.
I'm like, that's fine, but like, why? Like, that's a lot of math. That's a lot of math.
Yeah, and you know, again, this is pretty simplistic. I do like, you know, the using the proficiency modifiers. Those are relatively nice because it's, like you said, it scales with the player, it scales with the build that you've done. And again, it's like, I just don't understand what people's like what the fear of attunement is, because I mean, again, how often are you coming across, like, how many items really require attunement? How many of those items can you attune with? And how many of those attuned combinations, like, there sometimes you get an item that is an attunement and it's like there's a non-attunable item that's better than it. So it's like, really, what I
have heard of players basically holding on to, like, say there's one player and he's got 5 items, 5 attunement items on his person, but he's only attuned to 3 of them at a time. So it's like, hey, tomorrow I know I'm gonna need to use this globe of invulnerability, so I'm gonna tune to that today, and then they almost like ration like what they have out, almost like spell slots or something like that.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with that.
And I've seen like that, and so like, maybe if, again, in your example, if you want to give the players, like you said, they're higher level, they're whatever, they can have more, but like, maybe you want them to have those many earlier, but you still want to balance out. You want to give a little bit more strategy. So I think a technique like this can help scale what that strategy looks like a little bit better.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean?
Time, and again, it doesn't make any sense to cap it at 3 from the beginning to the end, because why should a level 1 have the same max as a level 20?
Yeah.
Like, what's the point?
Imagine you had those same 3 attunement slots way back at your level. No.
Yeah. So I like this. If you think that there should be a cap, I like Inventorology's idea. I think it's a quick, very quick, easy fix to it. And I think it's very simplistic. I think it solves a lot of the issues. And I don't think there's really anything you could argue against, those proficiency bonuses. I mean, it makes sense. It's proficiency in being able to attune to things, like,
right?
Makes sense. So, you brought up an interesting point too at the very beginning of just like not thinking about this, right? Because I've thought about attuned items, but again, for me, the attunement isn't so much a mechanic that I wanted about the item. It's more about the meaning behind the attunement, right? Like when I use attunement in High Point, it's much more about the meaning than it is a requirement to use the item. And a lot of the times it's either, like role play based, like you can find an item and then find out later that by attuning to it, you'll get more out of it. So it could be like a plot device. Sometimes, it's like, again, I like doing it sometimes for, it's like, attunement. I use attunement a lot for like holy items. So basically, churches can have items that rival churches can't use. So like, if there's like with holy warriors or paladins, a lot of the time, if they're sent to like, do a crusade, a lot of the weapons will basically be provided by the church, which will have an attunement of the faith, which means if you go down in battle, an enemy won't just be able to pick up your weapon and use its powers.
Got it.
Because they're not attunable. They can't, and then they can't just steal all the weapons on the battlefield because they have to be of the faith.
Where their guns were like fingerprinted to like a certain person. So like,
oh yeah, that's happened. I think the new Dredd did that.
Was that Judge Dredd?
There's a couple. Yeah, there's a couple ideas, but
I like
concept,
that.
Right?
I like that.
So those are the ways that I'd use attunement. But going back to the concept of like the 3 and why, I've already mentioned that I don't think that there's any justification to be worried about it. I don't think that there's any real need for a hard and fast rule. But the way I've always balanced it out and made sure, like, again, we talked about like how I don't really provide an environment for it. And so I've not really thought about a hard and fast rule for attunement, but I do have a limit already kind of built into High Point because it's the same limit that I apply to other things. Kind of like encumbrance. It's the same exact thing why I don't do encumbrance. And it's because I have what I like to call in High Point the limit of Jesus, I brain just like froze for a second there. Like it's the limit of rationale or the limit of reasonability, depending on what you want to call it. But limit of reasonability is exactly why I don't bother with encumbrance. The idea that a small pouch of 10 copper coins could be the difference between you having a disadvantage in combat and not is ridiculous, right? Like literally being able to just freely walk through town slowly, drop a bag, and suddenly, oh, I'm not that slow anymore. It's just ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're a very, very particular build and you got super lucky with a bunch of stuff, it's like, look, you're not Geralt from Rivia.
Geralt of Rivia.
Like you're not gonna have like the 2 swords on your back, the 2 swords on your hip, and a dagger here and a dagger there. Like I push the bounds because I always like to have as many daggers as the
I'm
DM
carrying
let me.
2 heavy crossbows on my hips.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like, and typically when I do my dagger setup, I work with my DM and say, hey, I basically want like throwing daggers, not fighting daggers.
Yes.
That are, by the way, if you didn't know, D&D actual like daggers are this friggin' big, handles like there, and the blades like that big.
And yes, you can throw them, but they are like long.
Which is why you need a separate proficiency in 2nd edition, which is why I agree that a ranged proficiency in a dagger is different. But I also, in 2nd edition and in High Point, there's daggers that are melee and range, which are proficiencies, individual for proficiencies, but throwing knives are a different set. Now, in High Point, I make a separation, and I think there is a separation in D&D. I think a throwing knife is different than a dagger. But I typically work it out with my DMs where my dagger holster is basically a throwing knife holster, but they let me overlook it because most DMs don't think about it. Because again, to me, words matter. And if they're letting me say dagger and use the the roll for the dagger, that's fine. But in my head, they're more or less throwing knives, right?
Right.
But that's just it, is reasonability. I'm not going to carry a battle axe and a greatsword and a rapier and a falchion and and 16 daggers on me and a longbow and still have both my hands free. You know what I mean? Like, that's not reasonable. It's not rational for you to be running through the forest, climbing trees, ducking and rolling and doing all of this fancy stuff, right? Like, I have a problem when someone says, hey, I want to carry a rapier, like a rapier on my side and then like 2 swords on my back. My thing is like, okay, so you always fight with the rapier first? Well, no. I'll go for the back first. It's like, so you're gonna have a disadvantage in combat. And it's like, well, why? It's like, well, you have a giant hilted rapier on your side, and you're trying to weave around it in combat. That's going to cause you issue, right? And you can make justifications. I know I used this example with you earlier, but it's like, you can make it's like, well, samurai, they carry their katana, and which one is it? The
katana, the naginata.
Yeah, they carry those on the side. It's like, yeah, but are you a samurai? No, you're not. That's a separate situation. If you want to build that character that's a samurai, I can justify that class, that build, overcoming that. But you can't just say random guy in plate armor,
right?
I have 4 swords on me and I don't have any limitations moving with it. If you can say, hey, I have a backpack that has these sword, carriers on it, that's fine. No more ducking and rolling. No more somersaults. Like, there's just, to me, reasonability, right? You can carry whatever you want reasonably. You know what I mean? You're not going to carry 4 sets of spare armor at all times.
Very much so.
Just because we're not near town. It's like, if you can't carry it, it's being left behind. Like, if you can't justify how you're getting it from location. Like, this is one of the reasons why I don't like the idea of finding a bunch of gold, like, in a cave somewhere, and then just magically we're back in town with all this gold. Like, how the fuck did you get it home? You didn't come here with carts. And, like there's this whole thing about, like, well, you just found gold, so there you own gold. You know what I mean? Like, it's just... Yeah. And you could say bag of holdings, but, again, bag of holdings were basically created for that purpose.
You don't have to worry about...
Like, I would almost put money. I would probably put money on betting that bag of holdings came into existence to literally solve money.
I'm curious. I'm curious how much money you'd put down on what edition bag of holdings were introduced.
I know they were in second, so I have to imagine maybe second.
Second?
I would imagine second, if not 3.5 maybe. It's hard to say because, again, I don't know, second or 3.5, I would say easy, because it's been a staple for a long time.
I was about to say it's been something.
But I have to imagine that that's exactly who the first person to create it was like. Why can't you just make a bag that holds like a shit ton of money? Like, why not just overcome this? And then the bag of holding was created, and they added more to it. But you know what I mean? Like,
how old is Doctor Who?
Who, 60s?
60s. And when did Gary Gygax do all this?
Late 70s, early 80s. But I mean, it depends on if you talk about publication or when they first created it. But
so I think Bigger on the Inside was a thing when D&D was first created.
Oh, easy. Yeah.
That's because that concept, I mean, like, when you think about magic, when you think about anything doing something it's not supposed to do, like even just regular ass magicians sticking their hand in their top hat where their arm goes all the way through it and everything,
pulling out a rabbit.
Just thinking about like, hey, like, stuff isn't always what it could be, you know, and you're gonna want to take that and use it, and you got a whole dimension in there, right? So I get it. I do get it, and realistically, a lot of what we do out here is we just try to make our lives easier, right? Cars, computers, all the things. It's like we want things to, and that's what this is.
How many of these rules, again, because I always judge based on what rules, like, again, encumbrance, money, at what point does it stop becoming fun? You know what I mean? Like, at what point does bothering where you're doing your money and how much of this gold hoard can we take? And, well, I don't have any pockets and I don't have a treasure. Like, at what point does that actually have a actual in-game relevance? And at what point is it just like, dude, just find a way to hand brush it away so they can get on with gaming? Like, they earn the prize, move on. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, for me, if you're literally stumbling across somewhere in the middle of nowhere, and you stumble across like, you know, just literally a kingdom's worth of wealth, I'm not letting you guys just instantly always have that. Unless you somehow create a way to have access to it. The idea is, no, you're going to only take out what you can carry. But if you're just, you know, nearby a town and, you know, you like take out a stronghold or something, or, you know, you rob some people, like, yeah, you're basically just going to have like an easier way of saying like, yeah, you probably just hit it nearby and came back for it later kind of thing, right? Like, there's a lot of different ways to justify it, but some rules just aren't that fun. You know what I mean? And that's where my concept of the rule of reasonability, because with attunement, right? Let's say you have a helm attuned. Well, I'm not going to let you also have a tiara. Like, the helm is the head dress item. Mm-hmm. If you have already like a crown that's also attuned, you can't put a helmet on that over that. Done deal. There's your limitation. You know,
would you allow multiple amulets?
So there's a big discrepancy there. Now, let's say maybe depending upon, you could talk about like the size, and this is where, again, how you describe things. Like I have I have my health potions kind of go up in size. You can have magical items based on their rarity go up in size. So maybe you have a choker, and then maybe you have like a necklace that hangs, and then maybe you have like a big medallion. So maybe you're limited to that, but you can't have two chokers. Mm-hmm. Because you could justify, again, the rules that you set for how these things work, reasonability. Maybe you could say, like, here's an easy rule to justify why you can't have more than one amulet. Because the way that things attune to you is it has to rest on you properly, right? Like a crown has to touch your whole head. You can't just hold the crown. An amulet would have to go around your neck, touch your chest, touch your skin. So you could say that having two amulets, because the strings overlap, one doesn't officially touch you all the way
properly.
So just stupid stuff like that, right? I think probably one of the biggest concerns about attunement probably came, and the reason why they limited it, I would imagine it came from rings.
Interesting, yeah.
Because the first person to be like, so I can just have 10 rings. I get it. I
Start
get
putting
the
that
concern.
shit on your feet.
I get the concern. Exactly. Put them on your feet. I can have 20. But here's the other thing too. Again, reasonability. While we know that people can wear foot rings as decorative items, putting on a piece of metal around one of your feet and then shoving that into a very tight, piece of armor or boot to go fight in.
Imagine having two of them side by side.
Yeah. So again, you can make these justifications where you can insist of why it won't work. But then you have other things like take a real fighter, someone who's, fought really in real armor. Do you really think that they're wearing their wedding band? Like, have you ever gone to the gym wearing your wedding band and accidentally done too many pull-ups and forgot to take your wedding band off? Have you ever have you ever done physical labor outside and done yard work, not taking the ring off? Like
I saw a video when I was in the military of something called degloving.
Oh yeah, degloving is a thing.
Don't look it up. But it's bad news bears, man.
But you know what I'm saying is the concept that I'm going to go into battle, I'm going to have a gauntlet on, which has a glove, has like a small layer, a padded layer, that layer. Or if I have to grip a sword, you want me to grip a sword that is filling my hand with a couple of rings on? That's going to fuck my hand up, right? So you could justify saying that in battle, you could wear all of this stuff, sure, but in battle, you're not going to be very useful. So again, it depends on the type of armor. Now, again, people are going to, to find their loopholes. Like, well, then I won't wear armor and I won't have a weapon and I'll do this. It's like, fine. Even if someone wants to make that entire argument, go ahead, bring it on me. Say, hey, Vortex, you know what? I don't have to wear armor. I don't have to have a weapon because I can have these rings and these rings that do this ability and this attack. And if I have all of this, if you don't have a limit and I just have to justify wearing it, I could basically be a literal walking tank of magic. And it's like, sure, theoretically you could.
Good luck.
Where you're going to get the first one. Just tell me where you're going to get the first one. No, you don't know, do you? So this, and then we go back to the conversation we had about 20 minutes ago of that is a subset of our culture, of our D&D culture and our community, where those what ifs are driving rules Because it's like, well, because you said I could, there's nothing stopping me from getting 30 rings because I could easily fit 3 rings per finger and I got 20, and I can get 2 per toe. So I could have 60 rings and they could all cast Fireball and one's constantly healing me and one's a protective spell. It's like, sure, you could. Where are you going to get all of that? How long is it going to take you to game that out? Are you going to get my attention as a DM to game that many games? Because you're not creating level 15 character with this much history. Ain't no way that's going to happen. Oh, and let's just talk about all the attention you're going to get halfway through this drought. You don't think someone's done that in High Point history before? Try to amass a bunch of power? You don't think that gets people's notice? Oh, and let's talk about what god is going to let you walk around as this unkillable tank. Like, again, this is why when I get passionate about things about DMs don't need certain hard and fast rules, because if you're backing into, well, the book says so, and I don't want to say that you're playing D&D wrong, because again, if you are just a by the book player, that's totally fine. But this is where I'm like, it's not the book's job to basically have you back into that. That's, you know what I mean? Like I just feel like as a narrator, it should be in your story, right?
I will say
of where those limitations should be. Needing to back into this, well, the book says it's only a 3, so you can only get 3. I feel like it's lazy, and I feel like there's so many different ways you can implement it, whether it's your campaign, your setting, or just being a DM and being like, you know what, I'll give you 5. I like the number 5.
I'm just now thinking about this because you and I are very different than potentially some others. Even Cosmic is a lot more like us in the sense that when we are in our worlds, this is our worlds. Like, we're creating something. There are a lot of people out here who are just trying to play a game, and somebody is almost like just reading a book, and that's fair. And for them, they might not understand the full concept of like balancing things and like making sure they don't have these things. Like, they might not see the need to put a restriction on how many you have on your hands and toes. And they're like, okay, that's fine. And then all of a sudden they get in the game and then everything's just all haywire and things get chaotic. And it's almost like when you were first starting to DM, imagine like the certain things that you allowed, certain things that were okay,
before the war
imagine like those DMs being in a rule where you could have as many attunement slots as you wanted, right? And it's almost like a base guideline or like an idea, like, hey, if you like attunement slots usually mean it has some sort of significant heft and power, and 3 is not crazy.
And like I said, like I totally get it. When you're just going through it, I get it, because I feel like it's one of those things where I'm not sure it needed a hard and fast rule. I think it's almost like they preemptively made a rule in case. I just don't think it was necessary. But at the same time, again, when you kind of Google it, there's so many people out there who don't get it, right? Like, and because there's no explanation, you know what I mean? Like, I have reasonability where it's like, look, if you want a helm, if you want to hold a sword, a shield, have a helm, maybe a suit of armor that all have attunement, makes perfect sense to me. Maybe, but it's like there's difference between, well, it's like, well, I want the suit of armor, but then I found these boots. It's like, well, the boots negate the suit of armor because the suit is a full suit, right? Unless you get a breastplate that is just the breastplate that attunes. And then you get, like, you'd have to really slice and dice your attunement. And again, where are you getting this stuff? You don't get to, as a player, you don't get to decide where you find these things.
Right.
So for me, it's like, I like the reasonability aspect. And then when you get into things that are like min-maxy, right? Like, well, rings, right? Because you can do the big stuff, right? One helm, one sword, one sheet,
Right.
You could do all of those things. But let's say someone brings up rings. Well, I think D&D, I think what they failed to do is give a compounding reason behind limiting attunement. And instead of it being something like concentration or some limiting factor like that, what if it's a fatigue factor, like exhaustion, where even though you're using these things freely, what you don't realize is that you use them, like you use the attunement items, but they're drawing on you to be used. which is typically why they only have like one per day. They need to recharge. So the idea of if you over attuned, it's literally like, because the book just says if you try to attune more than 3, it just doesn't work. So there's 2 ways to go about it. One, you could enact restrictions or limit or penalties. If you go more than 4 and then you start using all the powers, you could gain exhaustion points. But if you want to stick to the limit and have a reasoning behind it, you could say the reasoning why the 4th one won't attune to you is because you don't have a pool of energy left
for it to draw from.
It basically needs a base amount, and then it needs to know how much it can pull when you use it, and you don't have enough. Each item pulls 30%, and when you're at 90%, a 4th item you need that 90% to live. So each attuned item will take part of your essence when it's in use, and that could be your justification of that's why you can't attune, because you literally make a bond with this item, and it's feeding off of you, and therefore if you have too many, you would die. So you could easily make those kind of justifications, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you could even, so look at the other rules about attunement, right? Attunement ends if you're more than 100 meters away for more than 24 hours. Your attunement drops.
Is that, like, I'm curious about that. What are...
Yeah, so attunement drops, I have it right here. So attunement drops if you are... Spells, where is it? 24 hours. No, I didn't go all the way to the top. A creature's attunement to an item ends if the creature is no longer satisfies the prerequisites for attunement. So a cleric losing their cleric status, or a paladin losing paladin status, vice versa. If the item has been more than 100 feet, not 100 meters, 100 feet away for at least 24 hours.
Okay.
So there is distance cancels it, prerequisites cancel it. So again, once you're attuned doesn't mean you can't.
And there might be items that specifically say some of these rules don't count.
It could be. I don't think I've ever seen one, but could. Yes, there
could. Yeah, because I've heard of a couple that, like, it doesn't matter how far you are away from this item, it won't break. Yeah. I've heard stuff specific, like that.
And remember, rules as written, specific over general.
Very much so.
And then if the creature dies, or if another creature attunes to the item. So items don't lock out other people. You can attune to it, you just need to do the ritual part. So again, the attunement is more about the item just activates with that person, so it makes more sense, again, that it's tapping into your energy. And again, that kind of calls back to 2nd edition, where if you had these items before there was attunement, magical items would basically die with you. They would explode with you.
Could theoretically an item that requires attunement that is cursed, could somebody else remove that curse from them by attuning to that item themselves?
So I do think that cursed items that do like the attune, because that's the thing about a cursed item is, like, I think it really just depends on how you work cursed items, because a lot of the times it's once you put it on, it curses you, so it's an automatic attunement. And that's kind of how I've always looked at curses, like, mechanically, is it's an automatic attunement, like it's a forced attunement.
Is that, like, upon touch, upon use? So I mean, does it depend? It varies.
It all varies, because it really just depends on the narration. Like, I like to implement AOEs where the closer you are to it, the more the draw is. But once you've touched it and put it on, like once you worn it, then it's almost an instant attunement. You get all the benefits, but you instantly get the negative and the inability to want to remove it. So again, if someone wants to, like, take that item and then they can go attune to it, if it doesn't have, if it has an attunement property, then that would.
Because I'm thinking of like say you go dungeon diving, you find this cursed sword, like, and you guys, it's in this nice big open area, and the first person up to it picks it up.
Yeah.
Now I'm holding on to this sword. Am I now attuned to it? Am I now cursed by it?
So that just goes down to DM discretion. I don't think there is. So typically, cursed items just compel you not to get rid of them, or in some way magically bind to you. But I've had DMs do it many different ways. I even do it differently depending on who created the item, right, and the intention. But basically, the idea is, I think traditionally you always had to attune, and then the curse would be figured out. because the idea is the curse is hidden. It's a hidden feature of the item.
And that's kind of what I was thinking on that front. Like,
Yeah.
you do have to specifically attune to it.
And usually, because that's the other thing too, is like attunement has had like, it's kind of almost weird in a sense, because attunement is almost two things. It's what it is by the book, which is, the connection to the item, but it almost doesn't make sense, because how would you know to attune to it, right? Like, even if you use the identify spell, the concept of finding out there's an attunement, it's almost like attunement is borderline, it's magical. So attunement / vibing with it to get to feel, basically testing it out, right?
I can
like if you
give up a certain amount of, hey, you're getting a certain energy from something, or a certain vibe from something. Like, I can
I imagine it like this. Like, let's say you come into a room and there's like 5 wands on the ground, like 5 wands in this chest and a sword, right? You're picking them all up and you don't know what anything is. So those wands all have 3 charges of different spells. So in my opinion, the concept of like attunement with the sword would be the same as going through the wands and trying to figure out what spell they are. You basically have to kind of like activate them, figure out what the command word is, or however you imagine wands preloaded work, and you would cast it, right? The idea of you pick up the sword and you kind of wield it around, kind of feel it out, and you feel that it's magical, so you kind of like start to wield it and see if you can activate it. To me, that's almost, and again, we talked about this in another episode, the Dungeons and Dragons movie did a really good physical representation of how attunement works.
Very much so.
And I'm not saying that that's all attunement is, this battle, but if you think about it, if you pick up a sword and you're like, man, this is magical, what are you going to do? You're going to swing it around and you're like, maybe I have a feeling and then bolt of light. And you're like, oh, it can, like, that to me is the unspoken part of attunement. Because I believe we all think of attunement as you sit down, you hold it, you vibe with it, but how would you know? You don't just pick up a random thing and go, hang on, guys, I can't talk to it.
Again, everything you're describing is why I've never thought about attunement in my games. It's because anything that would be remotely reminiscent of attunement happens naturally throughout the character's interaction with the weapon.
And that's why for me, it
just becomes,
like, so when it comes to curse items for me, very rarely are cursed items like immediately instantaneous, right? But the idea of like, what I consider attunement is like, again, if it's a ring and if it's compelling you to put it on, the act of putting it on is attunement. You know what I mean? It's magical. It has something. Putting it on is like what we've talked about before. Magic is all about intent. Whereas if you pick up a sword, just picking it up and just swinging it back and forth once or twice isn't the same as trying to figure out what it can do.
Knowing what you know about it, is the One Ring cursed? Is that what you would call it? Seeing how it affects people, seeing what happens when you put it on.
So, I actually don't have in immediate memory the entire lore behind the One Ring, but I do understand that depending on the race, it can give you certain abilities. Each race, like hobbits disappear. Every race gets something, right? They're not all. It's not all invisibility.
It's not all the I
don't know if it's race or if it's individual, but you get a power. I know that the curse part is part of. You're going to be chased by it, but that's not really part of the curse. That's just a fact of people wanting it. But I also know that you don't want to get rid of it. So there's the curse. It qualifies as a D&D curse item because it automatically makes you not want to get rid of it. It gives you a boost of not getting rid of it. But it does seem to... I don't know if the lore is that it feeds off of you, and that's why like Schmeagol like aged and decrepit from a hobbit to what he is now.
So technically, the lore, from what I understand, is the ring wants to go back to its master, and so whoever it's influencing them to do things that would help it reconstitute its once master.
Gotcha.
And bring him back.
So in that particular case, 100% that is a cursed item. And the idea of putting it on, because again, you're touching it, you feel the drive. That's an intent to, I want this power, I want to use this power. But again, picking up a sword, knowing the sword has magical power, like picking up a katana and pulling it out of the sheath and realizing that there's magical power and putting it back, you're not intending to use it. But if you pull it out and you're like, what does this do? And then you start messing with it and you're like, I like this. It's that concept of like, you're getting the feel for it.
You're starting
that
to...
is an attunement. Now, there are other things that are much more intentional, right? Like what we saw in the D&D movie, where a helm actually, like, in your head, you're actually, like, trying to cooperate with it. There's so many different ways. And like I said, I kind of changed it up based on who made it and what it's for. But the attunement process, to me, isn't so much a book mechanic as it is, again, the rationale behind why is it there. And I'm all about more about when I have an attunement requirement, it's much more about the reasoning behind the attunement and not so much a limitation, right?
Right.
So it's if I have an attunement, it's because it's like it's faith-based, it's class-based, it's quest-based, like you have to be doing something, like it's usually a driving factor of something. It's not just, well, I don't want you to have too many of these, so I'm just going to put this on there. There's really going to have to be a good reason why attunement makes sense, because the person who made it, or the reason it was created, had to have justification to add this modifier. You know what I mean? And that's, to me, why attunement is important, but I don't use it as readily. And that's why I don't think a limit matters, because I don't use it like that. I don't use it to the point to where you would just amass so many different attunement items. And again, it's more about reasonability. There's just going to be a limit to where if you try to have all of this, these rings of magic, it's like, well, you got to think, in my world, magic is a flow. Where do you think these attuned items, why do you think they have to be attuned to you? Where do you think the magic's coming from? You know what I mean? It's like clerics get their power from the gods, mages get it from the world around them. Where do you think this ring is pulling energy to charge itself every day? You. So to me, when it bonds with you, it's literally linked to you. You are its energy source. Now, it may not be a lot. It won't kill you. It's not even noticeable. But you put too many on, and
too many that are too powerful.
Yeah, and that's my justification for
I got 15 legendary rings. I'm like, okay.
And you can't move because you're in a constant mental battle with 5 of them trying to take your body over.
Okay.
And you're in a weakened state, so what can you do? You know what I mean? Like, it could be that. I would just, like, anybody who gets to that point, like I said, the world, like, I say the world, and of course we all, it's all coming from me, but the world has boundaries, right? Like I said, I didn't bring up earlier the God comment to, like, Deus Ex Machina, but like I said, if you're amassing all this power, someone's going to notice. And if you finally get to a point to where you're damn near a walking god, my gods are going to notice. And it's not because I'm a Deus Ex Machina, Zenith is going to come down and just smite you and that's it. But lore-wise, roleplay-wise, mechanically, there are gods out there that watch for this shit because of balance. And so, yeah, if all of a sudden you're amassing power like that, they're going to kind of want to talk to you and you're going to get their attention.
All these conversations,
but that's game plus.
All these conversations make me, like, start thinking about the most random things you could do. Just imagine if you took over, you held a peasant hostage, right? And you got these 2 incredibly legendary, incredibly sentient rings that desire to take over the person that attunes with them. And then you put them on the same peasant at the same time and watch them battle it out. Just watch these 2 powerful enemies battle it out in this innocent peasant here. Like, bet money somebody's tried to do that.
Oh, so here's a campaign idea.
Bet money somebody's tried to do that.
Here's a campaign idea. The party is trying to rescue, like, an ancient hero or someone that's really good. Like you have, like, the whole purpose is to rescue this person. But you keep running into this, like, mysterious foe, constantly trying to kill you, constantly trying to, like, you think that they're after the person you're going after. Right? You think that they're trying to kill them and get in your way in order to get them. But, like, kind of like from Fate Zero, it's kind of like Lancelot never talks. He's just the silent knight. Just shows up, fucks everything up. And it's just constantly a burden, right? Always in the wrong time. Like, every time you feel like you're getting close, person shows up and just fucks your shit up. Come to find out, like, during a major battle, you knock their helmet off. It's the person. But they have 2 magical items on them, both doing exactly what you said, and they overpowered them. So they are literally not themselves. So they are basically being controlled by the magical items. So in order to save the person, you have to defeat the stuff but not the So imagine that as a plot hook, though. Is like
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
this
yeah.
one BBEG always in your way, masked and silent, but later down the road you realize it's actually the person you've been sent to save. You just don't know that they have no control, or maybe they're in armor that took them over. But kind of because I think that was what happened to Lancelot, is he was crazy over the item he actually possessed.
That's crazy.
Remember, because when he fought
I don't remember which one that was in.
it was Fate Zero.
Was it?
Yeah, it was my favorite one. But yeah, it was it was just a cool you just gave me that idea of, like you said, put the 2 rings on it. It's like, imagine that being someone important.
Yeah.
And that just fucks with their head to the point to where, like, the things don't want to be removed. So they try to kill anyone. And what are you trying to do? You're trying to save that. So you're just there. It's not even like a BBEG with a plan. It's literally every time, and that's the whole plot. Every time you get close, this thing appears. It's because every time you get close, it has to basically...
It's defending itself.
Defending you because it doesn't want to be removed from the person.
It's so cray. It's so cray.
That could be such a cool concept for a game, though.
I think that would be sick.
And then it kind of like, you could have like a duality thing to where it's like, you know, the enemy aspect of it has like a duality because it's 2 different items. So it's
yeah.
Because again, 2 items that were never meant to be worn by the same. Like, you could have the whole lore like they were like for brothers or something, or twins, or from a twin pair of gods. They were never like, they're the opposites, you know, and they were never supposed to come together, and somehow a poor mortal got them both put on them.
Golly, that's
like,
crazy.
This is why I love D&D. Just
See,
right off the bat, I can just come
about.
up with that. Like, I love that. That's the kind of stuff I want to be able to do, is give me a premise and I can just roll with it.
Let's run.
But yeah, so that's what I think about Attunement. I think Attunement limitations are overrated. I think that rationale, reasonability, and a controlled gameplay are all that you need to balance out this concept of people overpowering. Because again, when it comes down to it, how are they getting these items? Like, someone who says, well, I can totally break your game if I get these 5 items. Well, how? I mean, if you're like, again, from a DM perspective, how are they getting them? Unless you're overdoing it with items and you're just giving them out way too often, or they're getting super, super, super fucking lucky with the roll tables, right? Like, you just happen to have roll tables that always have an attunable item. And again, you must be giving them out. Like you said, maybe new people who are just following the book, they don't know any better. But again, in what book, if you're following the book, in what book are you giving them out that often? Like, unless you have a player who's convincing you, like, hey, you know, in this one, like, see this book over here, like, this item should be in this case. Like, unless you're being manipulated.
Imagine the DM that thinks every monster should be lootable because they've played video games before, and so they're hitting roll tables for every monster.
And that's what I'm saying. It's like, in that particular
shit's
case,
popping out.
In that particular case, trial and error. You'll learn. Like, the idea that we needed a hard and fast 100%. Rule to argue about for that person. Because like I said, like, unless the player is dictating where you play, where it's like, hey, in this campaign, let's go into this book and play this campaign in this chapter, because you know it's going to lead to a boss fight with an item, right? And then you're like, well, now let's play over here. You know, unless somehow the person who's amassing the character, the player is amassing this, unless they're somehow in control, the only way that this becomes overpowered is a DM who literally unknowingly or just full on knowingly gave the opportunity. And like I said, I keep saying this, but imagine like a Crystal City that is super wealthy and has every item, and you became super wealthy and could go buy every item. Outside of that, regular magic shops are not going to have, like, you know, that's another topic for another day. I think we should talk about, is like how to design a magic shop. And like how D&D magic shops should look. But you know what I mean? Like even if you go into a magic shop, it's like you either have to be not balancing the money correctly, not balancing how easily these items are attainable. And again, at what level are you thinking that you're going to be able to suddenly get more than 3 attunable items, either all at once or over time? I'm struggling outside of situations that, yes, I know could happen, but when you think of a rule, when you think of a hard and fast rules as written, brand new edition, I mean, when 5th edition came out, they created this. Right. So someone pre-thought this. I don't think this was something that they came up with to fix a problem. They decided to do this with 5th edition.
So there was no attunement before 5th.
No, it
not even 4th?
And it arrived with 5th edition.
That's so crazy.
So what's really fascinating about that is it was pre-planned. It was like they thought about this. It wasn't like a patch, right? It wasn't like they came out with 5th edition and years later they're like, we fixed
So
this.
let me
by
ask you
limiting
this: if we were to look at what came out with 5th edition and some of the stock magic items that were kind of a part of what was released, and what ones were attunable, like, does it
That's a
look
good
like it's
point.
realistic that if, hey,
Maybe-
one person got 5 of these, they would just be crazy?
And maybe it was maybe the idea was attunable items were more common, because I mean, when I think of an attunable item, I'm thinking of something that's going to give you a big boost. But you know, we could be talking about an attunable item that doesn't do a whole lot of benefit, but is just tacked on there for. And maybe that was maybe when 5th edition came out, maybe they had a different idea for a class of magical items that were attunable. Maybe there was a whole series that was just like, hey, this is what we're doing, and a good chunk of these 10-20% of these new magical items in this edition are attunable, so we gotta crank it down so you don't go after just those ones. I get it. I just feel like, again, I have a hard time, and again, that's a perfect example. That's probably the best reason we're gonna come up with. But I just have a hard time understanding why we went out of our way to make a hard and fast rule that we've never had before.
Yeah.
For a mechanic that was, while great, I think the rule of reasonability makes sense. I'm just really curious when they thought about this. What was the fear? And I don't want to say fear as in like, oh my God, they're gonna like destroy our game. But like, there's always a motivator, right? Did they think it was unbalanced, and in what way? Like how and where did they play test this to be like, it's unbalanced if you get 4, but how do you get 4 is my question, right?
Right.
And I don't want to just keep repeating myself, because I feel like I'm at that stage.
No, I get you though.
It's just one of those. I think there's a lot of ways to fix it. I like the proficiency bonuses.
I do like that.
I like just going with what makes sense and trickle feeding it. You know, if you're level 20, if you've gotten to that stage and you have a helmet and a sword and a shield and some boots and a belt and all of them are attunable, fucking go for it. You know what I mean? Like,
Freaking get you some, bro.
You collected all of it. And again, in my opinion, if you're wearing boots that are tunable, you're not wearing a full plate of armor. You're going to be wearing partial armor, because you can't wear the armored boots on top of those. Mm-hmm. If you have, you know what I mean? Like, we like thinking about like amulets, right? Like if you had multiple amulets, you could say that, hey, the entire amulet, chain included, needs to be touching your skin. So you could say, if anyone has ever worn multiple jewelries, technically, unless you size them perfectly,
unless they're those like perfect telescoping nesting doll motherfuckers,
and even then on the back of the neck, the chain will always overlap. Like if you've ever worn 2 long necklaces, you'll know the chains will always overlap. So one of the one you could justify one is not fully touching you, and therefore you could say, well, that's why you can't have multiple necklaces. The rings, you could, again, you could just make the thing of, hey, they're drawing off of you, so you can't. You could say you can't hold weapons if you're holding rings. I mean, people will argue that 5 ways a Sunday, but long term, you're not going to want to do that. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. But again, if someone's going to argue with you, how are they getting all the fucking items? Even if you just don't want to argue with them, be like, okay, bro, where are you going to get 20 items? Where are you going to get 15 different rings? You found 1. And you're worried that you're going to find 9 more. I'm not worried you're going to find 9 more.
Yeah.
I'm happy you found 1. Like, I don't. And then
I got you.
Yeah. And then again, of course, there's always the age-old traditional, and one I actually don't really like that much, argument of, well, if you can do it, so can everyone else. And it's an age-old argument for a reason. I'm not saying I hate it. I'm not a huge fan of it, because it is
the mindset.
The reason why I don't like it, kind of the mindset, is because it borderlines the Deus Ex Machina. It borderlines doing the foot in the sand of, instead of finding a good creative way to implement a rule, it's basically you being like, if you do it, I'm going to do it, but I'm going to do it worse. And I'm going to make it to where
I'm going to be mean to you about it.
I'm basically just going to make the game not playable for you again. Or because the Deus Ex Machina reverse of that is, well, I don't want a TPK, so I'm just going to change the rules or change the outcome here because I want a different outcome. And that's kind of what you're doing basically. If you have a character or a player who's arguing with you and you don't want to finish that, you're going to be like, well, if you can do it, I can do it. And if you can do it, anybody can do it. So the next NPC you're going to have is just going to have 19 rings and 4 necklaces and, 3 crowns and a helm and a sword and a shield and an armor that makes him invisible.
Or maybe that's just the way you explain it in your world, is there is one dude that knows what it means to be that powerful, and he's like the only person they can handle, and he's like attuned to like a million things. Anybody who tries to like collect a whole bunch of shit, he fucking comes for him, and he will cut off their fingers, he will cut off their arms,
and then he attunes, and then he just goes, and then when you're dead, he's just like, and just attunes to those items, and then just walks away.
Yep, he's just chinky boy. Let's go.
He's the god of attunement. He's
the god of attunement.
God, a god of attunement is literally just made out of attuned items. It's just a consciousness made out. It's like a robe that has a crown and a hell. It's literally just.
I was
going
to ask you, can you attune to 2 robes at a time?
And again, that's where you would come down to the idea of
can you make it make sense?
Is exactly, you could say the same argument with the amulets on robes. You're not technically fully wearing it. You're not properly wearing it. Now, people will argue, but the rule is 100 feet after 24 hours. So if I don't have to be touching it. It's like you don't have to be touching it to still maintain attunement, but you have to be touching it properly to use it. Like, again, you could easily make the justifications, right? And again, if you don't, you could just be like, look, I don't want you to min-max like that. And again, if they're going to argue with that, be like, no, I'm not. Stop. We're not doing it. Like,
I'm sorry, man. Like, guys, as D&D players, as humans, as whatever, boundaries are important. And not to be confused, a lot of people think boundaries are, you have to do this. No. Boundaries are you set for yourself. Hey, this is what I'm okay with, all right?
Boundaries don't tell other people what to do. They just tell them what you're willing to accept.
Very much so.
Like I said, boundaries
so.
Don't tell other people, you can't do this or you need to do this around me. What boundaries do is say, this is the limit of my tolerance, and beyond that, I'm out. Like, and that's all a boundary should be. You can argue with the person, you can tell them that they're bad, but at the end of the day, a boundary is not about them, it's about you.
100%.
And we're not trying to get philosophical about like mental health and all of that, but this covers all of that. But yeah, as a DM, as a player, like if you're a player and you go into a new DM session and you're like, hey guys, like let's say, because I've had players talk to me about this too, where they've gone into gaming sessions and like the gaming group is overtly sexual. Like it's a very overly sexual gameplay.
Yeah.
And their character is a little bit lewd and they find it uncomfortable. And it's like, look, there's nothing wrong with you saying, hey, that type of gameplay makes me uncomfortable. I don't want to involve myself in it. And I'm not happy playing when that goes on. Now, there's a difference, right? You could go up and say, you can't do that. That makes me uncomfortable, so you can't. That's not what a boundary is. That's a rule, and that's not what you do. But if you go in there and say, the boundary is that when that happens, I'm uncomfortable, and that's where I don't want to be, that's saying a boundary. Because if they choose to then continue to go there and push that boundary, you have to then stick to your guns and be like, okay, the boundary was crossed them out.
Yes.
You can get mad at them and you can be upset
that's what's
with them,
hard,
but it's not, you can't tell them they need to be the punished ones,
people
right?
Want to keep playing.
Boundary.
People want to still have the experience. They want to force everybody else to make them feel comfortable, and that's hard.
And it's unfortunate, but not everyone is like, yes, you are entitled to your opinions, you are entitled to your feelings, and you should be expressive of them. But nobody is obligated to pander to that. Like, you could tell them, I don't like doing this, and be like, and the DM could turn around and be like, hey man, we've been gaming for 10 years. This is our style. It's kind of the reason why we game. Like, it's what we do. It's what makes us fun. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable. They don't have to say, I'll talk to the people, I'll talk to the guys. They could just put their foot down and be like, honestly, it's kind of a thing we do. It's just how we game. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable, but I'm not going to tell them to stop. It is just kind of what we do here. I will let you make that decision if it's uncomfortable for you. But again, turning around and being like, well, you need to deal with it or leave. It's like, that's the wrong approach. Just be like, I'm sorry that makes you uncomfortable, but we're not going to change it. Or, hey, I totally get it. Let me talk to the people and we'll see what we like. There's so many different approaches, but you got to remember, setting a boundary isn't a requirement. It's not an ultimatum. Like, you don't have to make it rude. You don't have to be like, I'm never coming back. It's just more of a, if this happens, I'm not comfortable gaming. And that's what the boundary is if you're uncomfortable gaming, any time spent there after that is your fault. You can't sit there and continue to blame them for making you uncomfortable. Like, well, they know it makes me uncomfortable. Yes, they do, because you stated your opinion and you stated your boundary. You are absolutely right to be upset that they don't respect it.
They know,
but you can't.
It makes you uncomfortable, but you know they're gonna do it anyways.
They've established that, and you've made the boundary because you said that's where you were done. They understand that, and they're going to continue. The idea is they're going to continue without you. You can't then say, well, you guys aren't allowed to continue without me. Yes, they are. It's not, I'm not saying it's not rude. I'm not saying that it's the correct way, but you can't sit there and be like, well, I said that that's my boundary, so you're not allowed to do it anymore. It's like, no, you've set the boundary and they've chosen to continue on without you.
So there is something I wanted to see. It's something that I was looking into a while ago, because I know in a lot of gaming groups stuff like this can be challenging, but I've seen a lot of different places, and I don't know if we want to put this in our resources area, if there's some direction we want to go, but they have these like what do you call them, like surveys that you can like give your players and be like, hey, what kind of stuff are you okay with? What kind of stuff are you not okay with? You know, like what level of spiciness can you handle in like your gameplay? And just it's a cool resource, because I know there's a lot of people that like struggle with, how am I gonna look if I'm like, especially like, say if you're a guy and you don't want a whole bunch of overtly sexual talk at your table, right?
Yeah.
But all the other guys are like, oh, what's wrong with you? This is what we do. Blah. If you don't want to,
it's social pressures. Yeah,
very much so. Like if you don't want to go through all that, you can have like a survey. You can do it anonymously, like whatever.
I mean, that's great when you have self-aware DMs and players and the whole group is in on it. But I mean, I also understand, like, you know, I often hear people say like, but I have no one else to game with. It's unfortunate, but it's that whole thing of like, well, that is still a choice, right? Like, I hate to say it. I hate to not be more sympathetic.
Is gaming worth it? Like, that has to be the end question, is what you suffer from gaming with these people that game the way you dislike. Is it worth what you don't get by not playing?
Exactly. Because, again, it's like, if it's the only option, it's like the only option still doesn't mean that it's the option, right? It doesn't mean that it's a good option or it should be your option. If it's your only option, then guess what? My suggestion would be then you don't have options.
If you're, but like, think about it, if you're really, really hungry, if you're like freaking starving, you can wait to get something better, or you can eat what's in front of you. If all that's in front of you is like garbage, like literal garbage or like trash, you could technically eat it.
Yeah. But are you going to gain the same satisfaction or gain the same benefits from eating this now versus suffering through it later? You know, there's a lot of different analogies.
Exactly.
But the, you know, yeah, I just think that when it comes down to setting boundaries, it's important. It's never wrong to state boundaries, but boundaries should never come with expectations. You can say that, hey, this is something I don't like. I think
I'm
that's
not
a really
good way to say it.
Yeah,
boundaries should not come with expectations.
Because if you say I'm not comfortable when this happens, what you are really saying is, if it continues, or what the interpretation should be is, if it continues, I will not continue with you. I mean, take the analogy of climbing a mountain. If you say, hey guys, see that first peak? That's my limit. I'm not going beyond that. When you get to that peak and they continue on to the next peak, you can't turn around and be like, what are you guys doing? Where are you guys going? I said I wanted to only come here. I only wanted to hike to this rock. Why are you guys continuing? It's like, well, we want to hike to the very top. I was like, but I didn't. Well, that's cool. You said that you would only hike here, and we said we're going to hike to the top, and you said, well, I don't want to do that. That's my boundary. I'm like, yes, you get to stop here. You get to stop at this peak and go back home. You can be done hiking, right? You don't have to climb the mountain with us. But you don't get to be mad that we continued on. Now, there's a difference of, no, we don't split up. And then they're like, oh, well, of course we're going to split up because you're staying behind. There's a difference of, well, we're not that bad. And then you're really that bad. Mm-hmm. But the idea is, if you just say, hey guys, the plan is to go up there, and hey, you know what? You guys tend to go further than I'm willing to. I'm not comfortable with it. My boundary is now going to be this length. That boundary basically means you're not going to go any further, but you can't be mad if they want to continue on the hike, on the journey without you. And then if you continue walking with them, you don't get to sit there and continue to complain like, we should have turned back days ago. No, you should have turned back days ago. You were the one who said, well, I don't want to be left alone. I don't have anywhere else to go game, so I'm going to keep walking. I'm going to keep gaming. But then you make it their fault. You bring their game down that they've been doing and that they want. Like, remember, they want to make this climb. They want to continue gaming this way. You don't get to stop their fun because it's not technically hurting you, right? It's not like they're forced. Like, you may not like it, but your choice to be with that gaming group. You know, it's not a workplace, right? It's not like there's HR. It's not like these people are beholden to your feelings. Like, it's a gaming group. If it's your friends, they should have more respect for you. I'm just going to say that. If it's a group of people you know,
there are so many gaming groups that die for reasons like this, and it's really frustrating. And weirdly enough, this might be a duplicitous meaning for Beyond the Book, but I do think that this is a really important aspect of what D&D is, because D&D is very much a community-based game and a game where it's supposed to help bring people together, but just like anything else that's meant to be positive, it can easily be perverted and turned into something that it's not, and very divisive and just separating people. So encouraging like these mindsets and attitudes on like how to include people, how to make sure like tables can be a place where people can feel welcome, and what potential boundaries, because I totally understand that like as a DM not understanding that might be an issue for somebody, like looking around at my table and just
along the lines of being self-aware, like because you have a lot of these gaming communities that are like, you know, they set up at like game shops, right? And people who aren't aware or self-aware, DMs that aren't self-aware, gaming groups that aren't self-aware, like again, if you're a toxic masculine gamer and you found a group of those kind of people, if you're not self-aware that someone new coming to the group who may obviously not look like you, like in terms of like your build, your social status, like if you have a certain type of group and you're not being self-aware about that, and you're not realizing that's what putting people off, like to me that is a problem. That is not like, it's not like, hey, you're doing it wrong, but it's like that's a problem, right? Because if you know, like me, I am extremely open about pretty much the three things about my realm that I'm immediately open about, because not because they're bad, but because they have potential for controversy. I'm always very much open about second edition as my foundation. Mm-hmm. I'm always open about the open world levelness, that I don't do campaigns and I don't do modules. I don't do pre-written scripted stories. And it's player focused. It's the more you interact, the more the game interacts with you. Like those are, no matter who I talk to, if I'm talking about High Point, especially for the first time, those will be the three things that I will say. Is because those are the typical things that if I'm talking to someone who's brand new, it doesn't matter. That's how I entice them. But if I'm talking to someone who's played D&D for a long time, these are going to be things that set us apart immediately, right?
It's how hey, I'm playing a different game than you might have ever played before. I'm not going
to go to somebody and be like, hey, I D&D, I play D&D, I DM, and then be like, yeah, create a character and then come over and game with us. I'm never going to do that. Because do you know how just absolutely terrible that experience would be? Someone comes over, 5th edition character built out, and then all of a sudden I hit them with High Point rules. That would the game would be over at that point. That would never recover from that. And I'm not saying that playing the second edition is bad. I'm not saying that any of my rules are bad, but setting expectations, right? We don't play overly sexual. We're not overly brutal. We're not overly in any particular area except for open world, second edition rule sets, and the more you interact, the better you get from me, right? Like those are the three things I need to heart, because those are the most controversial aspects of gaming with me, because they're not standard. Those are definitely not things you're going to see in other people's gaming sessions, right?
Right.
But if you're not self-aware about those things, if you're not self-aware about where people could have problems with it, right? That's where I say, like, if you have that one player, right? If you have that one player who, you know, is just a little off-putting, maybe the way they play their character, maybe they're just a little bit too bossy. Okay, perfect example. Here's a colloquial example of how we do it. Of how we do it properly on average. Of how people are self-aware. Because most games are self-aware, or most gaming groups are self-aware when they have a rules lawyer. Because any gaming group you join that has a rules lawyer, guaranteed at least half that gaming group is going to let you know who it is. The DM's going to let you know. The person's probably going to let you know. And at least 2 of the gamers are going to let you know
It's
rules
that
lawyer. And that's colloquially okay. It is okay to be called out as a rules lawyer. It's okay to have a rules lawyer.
I think I'm a lightweight rules lawyer.
You are.
I really do.
But you're not a rules lawyer as in a, no, let me ruin the game because it's not right. You're the rules lawyer of a, you said we're doing it by the spell and the spell says this. If it's otherwise, say so.
Here's my the thing that hurts me the most is I am a rules lawyer for the player and the DM. Like, I will see a player
You're a consistency lawyer. You aren't a rules. No, you're not a rules lawyer, because if someone says, no, I'm using this particular spell as it's in the book, and then they misquote it, you're gonna be like, bro, that's not how the book says it. But if they go, oh, no, I'm using a modified version, you're gonna be like, okay, whatever. A rules lawyer is like, but that's not what the book says. You're using magic missile. You don't get to modify it. You have to call it something else. You just go, you said you're using it off this book. That's not what the book says. I don't care if you want to change it. What you said was by the book. And that's, to me, not a rules lawyer. You are more about consistency, and you're like, look, because like you said, you'll do the same thing with the DM, where if someone's like, but that's not how it says in the book, you'll be like, but remember in the first gaming session, he did this. He did say in these situations that rule doesn't apply. Mm-hmm. So he's being consistent. Like, you'll call out a DM for flip-flopping rules, but you'll also call out a player for not paying attention to the consistency that the DM is set up.
Yes.
So I wouldn't call you a rules lawyer. You're only a rules lawyer when someone says they're using the rules and you catch them
not doing the thing that they said.
Which is, again, it is why we have such great discussions in High Point, because you don't try to tell me that I'm doing it wrong in High Point. It's okay, you've said this. I don't see the connection. Let's make that connection first.
Let's find it. Yeah.
And I like that. It's made me so much better as a DM. Because again, I've had rules lawyers, and it's more frustrating to argue with them, because no matter what your rationale, they just back into it, but that's not how the game is played. And that's why I created Beyond the Book, because that's not the
100%.
game. If I tell you, hey, this spell works as it does in the book, and you call me out and say, you got this part wrong, oh, my bad. I will retcon and I will change it on the fly, because yes, I told you it's from the book, we're using the book, but when I'm not using the book, I'm very open about it. And I have a whole backing about where that comes from and why it's not being done from the book. But, we're going off topic. But yeah, the rules lawyer, I bring that up because that is something that's kind of what we're all used to. We're all used to people kind of being called out for that. That's somewhere where gaming groups as a whole are self-aware. They're self-aware as the whole group knows there's going to be the rules lawyer. But not a lot of people are self-aware in other areas. Gaming groups don't know that they're a little bit toxic, or that they're gatekeepers. Other ones don't realize that they're, sexist. Others don't realize that they're, there are others that are structurist. Basically, like, the idea is if you come in and they're like, no, we already have a cleric. You can't be a cleric. We already have one. Stop.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. My character already has that ability. No, you can't be that race because my character hates that race. Like basically forces you, shoeholes you into something.
Yeah.
Most places aren't self-aware when these traits happen, because these traits are so unique to groups. Whereas a rules lawyer is kind of like, it's a trope. It's a meme. It's easy for everyone to like jump in on that. But like the trope of the forever DM, which is always boggled my mind. Like, maybe it's because I've gamed in groups like this, but I've never, like, when I've gamed in groups like this, but like not hardcore, and it wasn't early on. But I know gaming groups that, like, it seems like the concept of the forever DM comes from this mindset that people got together to play, and then they would take turns telling, like, the DM, like, it wouldn't be an ongoing story, right? It would be hey, we're just going to do a one shot. You're the DM today. Then I'm the DM. And that's how we all learn D&D. And then eventually someone's so good that everyone just assumes they're going to be DM, and therefore forever DM. And it's like, it boggled my mind, because when I was starting to come up in D&D, the idea was, I mean, it's not like I thought you couldn't be a DM right out the gate, but my idea was, like, always, of course, there had to be someone who took the DM reins first. But unless you wanted to do that, unless you wanted to be the narrator, unless you wanted to have all of the, because to me, it wasn't about control. It was about work. Being a DM in the early stages when I was gaming was like, that's a lot of work. You have to know a lot. You have to maintain a lot. I'm just a player. I just tell you what my attack rolls are, and you're doing math behind the scenes and all. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have to deal with all of that shit. So being a player was nice. I just said things and asked questions and got responses. Like, being a player was an amazing. Again, it was a game that was live. Like, it was so great. So to me, the idea of being a player long enough until you felt comfortable, until you worked up the skill sets to narrate a story, to organize combat, to know how to run an encounter. These things were something that I always looked at as you worked up to a DM, unless, again, you were naturally a good storyteller and you just wanted to read all the books. But now I see it more as D&D, especially 5th edition, has become more of a, I don't want to use the term cookie cutter. It's become more of a standardization.
More of a referee rather than a
well,
storyteller.
It's more like in 2nd edition, it's like you really had to have a grasp of D&D. You had to play for a while to really get all the nuances. Nowadays, it's not cookie cutter, but it's so compartmentalized. It's very easy to pick up D&D. It's very easy with,
and I do think that's intentional. I think they want to bring it more accessible.
You know, but yeah, it's so much more accessible to understand the core concepts of running a game, and there's so many tools that back in the day you needed more of a finesse, more of a skill set to be a DM. And I'm not saying that DMs now don't have that. It's just to pick up DMing with the resources we have now is so much easier for people to get into a groove, whereas before you almost had to have a groove before you tried to be a DM.
So way I kind of looked originally at being a DM is it felt like you had to have a degree to be a DM, right? In martial arts terms, it felt like you had to be a black belt to be a DM. You had to have had like a shit ton of experience. You had to know all the things to be able to do.
And you can still make that argument for a good DM. Like a lot of good DMs.
What I will say is that when I first started DMing, it was like I had just graduated kindergarten and now you're asking me to teach college. Like, that's how it felt, you know? But I think that with the evolution of what it means to be what it means to play D&D, what it means to be a martial artist, so to speak, I think it's now changing a little bit so that it's not as intensive. Like, literally anything can be a D&D game. Like we were saying before, as long as you and your players are having fun, you're doing it right.
Exactly.
Right? If that is being accomplished, it doesn't matter what your skill set is. It doesn't matter what your qualifications
make
are.
It so much easier because back in the day you needed books. If you wanted to learn how the DM side of looked, you had to buy the books, you had to read the books, you had to memorize a lot of stuff, you had to make notes. Nowadays, not just because it's all digitized, but the way you can consume D&D content and the way that D&D plays, it's a lot easier now to see how a game should be structured, how a story can be told.
And it's easier for DMs to not need to have external content. It's just a mental structure that they have. And it's like, okay, if I don't have a monster manual, I will create something that I pop in my head and I will give it hit points and then I'll give it attacks.
And the more skill, the more experience you have, the better those creations will be. But
very
that
much so
stop you from making those right out the gate. Like you said, like the martial arts was a good reference point because like back in the day, like back growing up, it was hard to become a martial artist, right? Like you said, not just be that you had to be one, but like the idea that not only did you have to, like growing up, it was you had to basically go to martial arts school most of your life. You had to find a location to go to. And do all this other stuff, you know, like the idea of being able to go to a local gym and take a class and say I'm a martial artist because you're taking classes at a gym, versus no, back when we were growing up, it was like no, you had to go to a established place with a master of that craft who would then teach you over many years, and then maybe if you were good enough, you could test up. But then nowadays, it's more like go to your local gym and you know for $20 extra a month, you just take a couple classes.
Yeah,
and it's like again, that's not necessarily bad. It doesn't make the content less favorable. It does make it more palatable and quicker access, but there's still a difference between someone who's going to Crunch and taking a class and teaching you how to do a back kick versus going to an actual person who's been doing it for 50 years, has been training for 20, or who has been teaching for 20, and them teaching you the back kick. Both will get you there. But which one has the better process?
I very much agree with that. And I'll even go a little bit further. It's like, imagine if back in the day they thought that the only type of martial arts was karate. Nothing else was considered martial arts except karate. If you weren't doing karate, you weren't a martial artist.
Yeah.
But now, as time has gone on, okay, Muay Thai is martial arts too. Jiu-Jitsu's martial arts too. Jeet Kune Do is martial arts too. You know, all these other things are
eventually
now
the accumulation of MMA. Now it's just, as long as you can control yourself in combat, you're a martial artist.
Now when I look at like what D&D looks like, granted we have a million different editions. We have other things called what's the other game that's not exactly Pathfinder. You know, you have other different like RPG type games, but
the TTB or the TTRPGs.
A lot of people just use D&D as a blanket term almost nowadays. Like we use Kleenex, you know, for a lot of these things. You know, we got Game Master instead of DM, whatever the case may be. But a lot of we are now broadening what it looks like to play this game. Homebrew is now like all the resources that we have that people have created that you can now just like plug and play into your game. Like it doesn't have to be one way. And everything that you and I are talking about right now, how many people have created their own worlds and their own things, like the idea of what it means to play D&D has very much expanded. Playing a random game, sitting at a table, just expanding your imagination is just as valid as playing in a Matt Mercer involved, in-depth built world. And you'll see the value of somebody like you who has got a lot of experience and who's got stuff understood. And anybody who plays in your world is going to feel that there is care taken into everything that they're experiencing. And it is going to be incredibly beneficial for them, right? But playing in something like we were talking earlier about Brendan Lee Mulligan, like, now granted, he does plan a lot of his stuff, but a lot of what he does is more chaotic, is more spontaneous, is more in the moment, you know, in how he deals with the situation and how his players do things and how he responds to them. But at the same time, you still feel like there is care taken because the way he rolls with it might not be the same detail, but it is personality-wise. It's always weaving into...
it's his own spin on it.
Very much so, you know? And so I feel like everybody now that we can increase what it looks like to be a D&D player or a DM. Like one of my players he played like 3 or 4 times with me, and then he started his own group with his friends at high school, and they love it. They're having the greatest time, and he like dove into the rules and did all that, and the way they play their game, like, it's different than me, but it's phenomenal.
As long as they're having fun.
They have a great time, and
that's the thing is, like, you know, like you said, like D&D is an umbrella term, so, you know, you can sit there and argue about, well, that's, you know, what they're playing isn't D&D, and it's like, look, like the umbrella term of whether you call it D&D or a TTRPG, whatever you want to like actually call it, like you hit it on the head earlier too in the concept of like why even bother, right? Because you can make the argument, it's like, well, if homebrew is just as good and all it is about a story and all of that, then why bother with all of the additions? Why even bother having a difference between what's real and what's not? Why not just accept it all? And it's like, well, it goes back to what we talked about earlier that we just keep bringing up. It's about consistency. The only reason why we have additions in D&D and TTRPGs aren't just thoughts and opinions and just stories being told in friends' houses. The only reason why we have the books and the things is to make it consistent. It's so you can come into High Point, make an elf, pick up a dagger, and do 1d4 damage against this orc. And then you can take that, go to another person's realm in their game, make an elf, pick up a dagger, and do 166 damage to an orc. That is why we have rule sets. Now, whether that dagger is curved and a kukri blade, whether it's a throwing dagger, whether you have to roll a d20 to hit them, or whether you have to do some sort of complicated headstand while, you know, you imagine a dice roll, I don't care. The point is the reason why we have the additions and why we have a governing body, well, A, they want to make money, but B is because of the consistency. we have modules and campaigns so people can have ideas that they don't have to create themselves. Like homebrewing or creating your own realm and your own setting is not easy. It's easy to create a setting in a tavern, maybe a couple NPCs, maybe a couple history notes about it. But then that tavern in that city, maybe that's an easy idea. But what about that tavern on that street in that city, in that side of town on that city, next to that other part of town, with who else lives there and who really controls this town and what gangs control it and what do other people in the town think of it and how does this town fit into the local community of towns and what do those towns think of this town and what does this town think of those towns and who's in control of this whole province and who's the king and what is like, those are the things of not everyone can do that. Not everybody can plan out, oh my God, if they talk to this NPC and what is he going to do? And then what if they attack him? And then what if they don't attack him? And then what if they insult him? Not everybody can do that, which is why you have the modules. You have the campaigns, you have the books to give you those guiding points. And there's nothing wrong with following them. Again, we never say don't follow them. It's just those aren't the only way to play. And you shouldn't be forced into
You shouldn't feel
that.
Caged by them.
And yeah,
if you want to use them as a guideline, think about the bumpers when you're going bowling. You can use them to help you stay focused.
Oh, yeah.
But once you feel free enough, once you feel comfortable enough, drop those suckers. Ride the line.
And see what the consequences. Like live the consequences of riding in the gutter.
Sometimes you hit the gutter,
and that's the thing for me is like that's the reason why I say I have a foundation in second is because the majority of the rules you will find the rules that I will follow in second, and if not, they're high point specific, right? Or I will call out, I will call out like what other edition I took it from. Like I have Attunement in my realm, even though Attunement isn't in second edition, but I've always had Attunement. So it's things like that, right? It's looking at it from a different perspective, I guess. But realizing that is the answer. The reason why we have the books is for consistency, is because if I run a D&D style game and you run a D&D style game under that umbrella, if you go to a weapon shop and pick up a base dagger, in my realm and your realm and anyone's realm, it's going to be the same. That is why we don't just make up every rule, because not everyone can do that. And we want some level of consistency, because otherwise we're not playing the same game. In order to say like, hey, I have a character build, I like to do this, and have some expectations. The only reason why D&D works is because people have expectations. We have that consistency. But the expectations and consistency aren't the boundaries of this game.
And you can outline those things ahead of time and make sure that those consistencies are agreed upon ahead of time,
Like I mean, again, like a huge inconsistency in High Point that doesn't appear in anywhere else, but is a very, very lore specific is like my money. What am I thinking of? My exchange rate in High Point for gold. The exchange rate for gold is actually off in High Point compared to standard. And there's a lore reason for it. There's actually a very, very deep lore reason for it. But in High Point, gold equivalency exchange matches D&D until you get to platinum.
Platinum is more valuable in your realm? Tremendously, right? Yeah. Like slightly exponentially?
Like a whole extra zero.
A whole extra, that's what I thought. Yep.
Yeah. So that's the idea is that is just one of those little tiny quirks that could be very easily overlooked until you realize it, but it's not a mistake. It's just one of those little tiny things where I have the foundation of how currency works, but I have a setting reason why right now in the current era there's a imbalance.
And that's very fair. I mean, shoot, if there's a certain resource that's extra valuable, it makes sense. It's gonna, or extra rare, it's gonna make sense. It's gonna spike in value. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so just like little things like that, where that I get why people want these rules and I get why people want the limitations, but I feel that I'm going back to what I said like an hour ago. I don't think Attunement was one of those areas that needed a hard and fast rule in this. I don't think it made much sense. I think the concern was trying to stop people doing something that I don't think anybody was really going to do. maybe not, except for once. Like, and think about that. Like, again, the way people play games, you can't really like, you can ruin that story, that gaming session, but it's like, if you broke this, it's like, then you just learn and don't let them do it again. Like, I don't know. I just really want to know what the true reasoning behind
Real origin.
who said
Yeah.
this needs to be a hard and fast limited rule with no explanation. I just want to know who and why they put that in there, because I feel like it was either underbaked or they were way too deep in the weeds of, but if this happens, there'll be a god. Yeah. And it's just one of those things where it's like, maybe, again, like you said, when they first built it out, someone pointed out, hey, if you wear this certain set, technically in our book, you're a god. And they were like, it takes 5, let's limit it to 3.
Yeah.
But it's like, it's like, who's playing that game? In fact, you know what? I want to be in that game. I want to be a player in that game where that DM is literally just throwing out so many magical items to the entire party that we're all basically just like,
you get an item.
Yeah, you get that one.
And
we're just, and then you have the one person who happens to get all 5 items that make him a god. I want to be in that game just because I want to know how imbalanced that gameplay is. I just, you know what I mean? Like, I want to.
He's got all 5 Exodia pieces, and he wins D&D.
That's what I want to know. I want to know who's gaming that game, and I want to game in that. I want to be that kind of high level gameplay where every fucking game we're killing a dragon and getting a horde, and we're all getting 2 magical items every single gaming session and 15 level. Like, I don't know, man.
Let's go.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I don't think we can say much more about this. I think it was a great question. You know, why is it original question, guys?
No, it was
why
good.
was Attunement stuck at 3? There is no justifiable answer. There's no answer in the books. There's no answer from Jeremy Crawford. There is no justification. I think if you need one, the best thing is like a life force kind of thing. These things need to draw off some sort of energy to recharge. You are that energy. The attunement basically is an acceptance. I give you my energy to recharge. You let me use you. And therefore, you basically have only so much to where the attunement is just like, you don't have enough energy for me to siphon off of you. That could be your reasoning. I like the idea of being able to have more than a couple items and then maybe just changing around what you're attuned to.
Swapping them out.
You know, there's so many different ways that you can go about it. I don't know why 3 was the choice. There's got to be a reason.
3's just a really good number. Like, I don't know
maybe
if
it's a 3. Maybe
how much you really like it, number. But like, it's a good number. I
don't know. I think for High Point, I like the rule of reasonability. Makes so much more sense to do it that way. I really like what Inventorology put, which is 1+ your proficiency modifier. I think that's a great option as well. But again, I don't think worrying yourself about how many attuned items your players can put on. I think if you're worried about that, I think you're worried about the wrong things. So I know we don't use that word here about wrong, but
right.
It's more of a, if you're worried about them having too many items, like being able to tune to too many items, maybe you should be worried about why they're getting so many attunable items.
Like, whenever I run into an issue, before I ask myself, how do I fix this issue? I first ask myself, how did I get this issue?
Yes.
Right? And then after I do that, I'm like, is there any way for me to prevent this issue in the first place so I don't have to worry about fixing this issue?
It's like, do I need to fix the leak or it's like, is there a leak? Like, is there an actual problem here that needs fixing?
Do I need to put a bucket underneath here, or do I need to patch the hole?
Yeah. Or it's like, hey, you could put a bucket down because there's always water on the ground. But is it because there's a leak and you have to fix the leak and you actually have to find a solution? Or is it because you're not paying attention and every day you get out of the shower and you're tracking water on the ground? That's a problem that's overcomable. But if you're trying to sit there and go, oh, well, there's always water on the ground, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to get a rug that absorbs water and dries super fast. I'm going to put it in here, and then I'm going to make sure that I always dry it. And you're adding all these extra rules when you could just dry off in the bathroom. But you're not solving the problem at hand. You're not realizing that, oh my gosh, no, hard and fast rule, you can't have more than 3. It's like, do you need the rule? And if you do need the rule, is that the problem? Is the problem that you need the rule, not the rule itself, right? So I don't know. I think we're just gonna keep repeating the same thing. I think it's kind of a moot point at this thing. I think the vast majority of people, I think the average player and DM all agree attunement minimums at 3 at least don't make any sense. I think we can all agree 3 is not the right number. If you're going to put a limit, 3 is not the number to do.
I mean, it's a good number to start with.
5, I can understand 5, and you could break it up by category. You know, maybe you could do like maybe 5, but within reason, no more than 2 of the same type.
Maybe like, you know how some video games have like slotted body parts? You can have one head, one foot, one chest, one arms.
Maybe you could do like, okay, you can't have more than one of the same type. So I can have one helmet because I can only fit one thing on my head. So I wouldn't be able to do 2 anyway, but I can only have 2 rings. I can only have 2 bracelets. I can only have 2 necklaces. Like maybe you have this limitation of the types. And again, that way you can just, the roll table says you're going to get this item, but you already have an item similar to it. So we're just going to change what it is. You get a ring, now you get a necklace. Oh, you were going to get a helm. Well, now you're going to get a dagger. Like you can always just change up those aspects too. Right. That's the other thing about Beyond the Book. You don't have to fully homebrew something to make it work. You can just change a small aspect, but let everything else go and still make it work.
Very much so. Very much so.
And I really think that that's what attunement really has to be is we all don't like it. Just do what makes sense to you. You know what I mean? Whether you're just being reasonable, whether you just up the number, whether you put it as a proficiency bonus. I just don't think any of us agreed that attunement, at least 3 slots, makes any sense. And yeah, I don't think it's a problem. I honestly, I think you have the best approach to it, which is not even to think about. like realistically, again, it almost hurts my brain to have to come up with this amazing scenario in which a single player, either one-on-one with their DM, has gamed enough to get all these items, or within a group and has racked them all up. I just, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's all in all, it is not. It hurts me to have to think that hard about how and why that would ever come about.
How and why and why and how.
But that brings us to the top of the 2 hours. I think that's fantastic for our time and our subject today. So I think we are going to call it there. We appreciate anybody who's in chat right now. We didn't get a whole lot of interaction, which is fine. But hey, that's going to happen. We do appreciate you guys if you are in chat. If you are catching this late and you want to go check anything else out, or you want to check out anything else we've talked about in previous streams, you can go check us out on YouTube at MisfitGamersStudios Live, where all of our live streams are posted, and they are live streamed. They're dual live streamed, and then they're always there for you to go check it out. Otherwise, if you are in chat and you guys want to chit chat with us, if you want to submit any items for us to do on our Monday homebrew, or if you have any topics you want us to discuss, you can join the Discord, which I've just posted in chat right now. And then otherwise, if you're watching us on YouTube, thank you so much. Like, subscribe, let us know in the comments what you think, if you have any ideas, if you agree with us, if you don't agree with us. We definitely want to know what you think about attunement, because we had a lot to say today. But otherwise, that's going to be us for Friday. I hope you guys had a fantastic week. I hope you have a great weekend ahead of you. We will be back on Monday, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, for D&D Discussions Homebrew Review, which we will review. What is our next item for next week?
That's a great question.
Next week,
I was actually going to suggest this to you. We actually announce what we're gonna review on Fridays. I think that's a good idea.
I think we are doing the Sunbeam Crystal Revolver.
Oh, very cool.
That was
very
from
cool.
you. I think you brought that
Exciting,
from
yes.
outside. If we can't go the whole amount, we do have another backup. We'll always have a backup.
Okay.
But we will be doing the Sunbeam Crystal Revolver, submitted by you via a TikTok.
That's correct. Yes.
We haven't decided if we're going to review the TikTok or just do the write-up that you did. I don't know.
We did the write-up last time. The TikTok that I submitted, the dueling rings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm very weird. I know it's different because we're probably more on the fair use side because we're fully breaking it down and talking about it.
I mean, you see those review videos or reaction videos all the time. I'd say it's along those lines.
I would much prefer to give the credit and talk about the mechanics of the item and then just link to the TikTok.
Very much so.
I feel weird about watching someone's content for my own content.
That's
I
fair.
like taking the idea of it though. Like you bringing the idea and being like, okay, let's really
And I want to do it as justice as possible. So I use their words and I articulate it as best as I can the way that they've done it. So
yeah. So join us on Monday for that, 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, where we will be reviewing the Sunbeam Crystal Revolver. Otherwise, have a fantastic weekend. I hope you all have a great time ahead of you, and we will catch you on Monday.
Deuces, my friends.